Welcome to Leadership Now's Zoomcast series. My name is Manahil Amin, and I'm the Director of Investment here at Leadership Now. The Leadership Now project is a membership organization of business and thought leaders taking action to fix American democracy, advance evidence-based policy, build an economy that works for all, and increase diversity in government. We launched the Zoomcast series as an accessible and dynamic way to share out the knowledge and insights of our partners and members. One of our focuses at Leadership Now is improving data and transparency in politics. As such, earlier this year, we selected the Center for Political Accountability for our portfolio of investments. I'm excited to tee up today's conversation between Bruce Freed, the president and co-founder of the Center for Political Accountability, and Kevin Brennan, the co-head of investment research analytics at Bridgewater Associates. Kevin is also an investor member of Leadership Now and a board member of the Center for Political Accountability. Bruce and Kevin will be discussing the insights from CPA's latest report, Conflicted Consequences, which explores how public company political money has reshaped state and national politics. Kevin and Bruce, over to you.
Manahil, thank you. So as Manahil said, I'm Kevin Brennan. I've been a member of Leadership Now for several years. And, I've gotten to know Bruce and some of his incredible work at CPA over the past year as part of my education of getting to know our political process, and particularly learning about the role companies play and the role money plays in the political process. And I became a board member of CPA beginning of this year. And it's been a real education for me. And I've really, really enjoyed working with Bruce, and I'm excited to talk to him today. So Bruce, I was hoping you could, provide a bit of context on the Center for Political Accountability, kind of where it came from, what it's focused on, and then more specifically dive into the Conflicted Consequences report, which really got into, I thought, some really compelling analysis on, the roles companies play in money and finance, money and politics, and some of the unexpected results that can occur from that, and some of the more problematic results that came across. Be great to hear from you.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Kevin. I must say, I'm glad you joined the board, and really enjoyed working with you, and I really appreciate the relationship that we have with Leadership Now. The Center for Political Accountability was founded 17 years ago to address an issue that really had not been touched before: the role of corporations using corporate treasury money for political spending. This whole area of political spending with corporate funds is very important, because that's where a great deal of undisclosed spending occurs. Companies can spend in many different ways. They can give to candidates, they can give to party committees. Candidates were allowed by law, but they also can give unlimited contributions to committees known as 527s that have been crucial at the state level for reshaping state and national politics. They also contribute through trade associations, when they make their payments to the associations, and through groups known as 501c4s. These are the secretive social welfare organizations. We have been leading an effort to really encourage companies to adopt disclosure and accountability policies. Been doing that through both the shareholder resolution process, where we engage companies directly. Shareholder partners will file the resolution, we'll be involved with them, but also through the CPA-Zicklin Index, which is our annual benchmarking of companies on their political disclosure and accountability policies. Over the past 2 years, as political disclosure and accountability has become the norm, as companies have recognized that that's essential for enterprise mismanagement, we have been looking at the impact of risk that companies face now as a result of their political spending. And we focused on the 527 committees because companies can make unlimited contributions there. As I said before, they've been crucial for changing control of state legislatures, electing governors, electing attorney generals, and a raft of policy and legislative and legal results that have followed from that.
It's great. There's a couple of things I found particularly interesting. One, just going back, what of this is transparent and what is not transparent, and the role your organization has played in trying to help companies, as well as, providing some transparency yourself. It'd be helpful for you to talk about that. And then I think the other thing that would be really helpful is to hear, your engagement model with companies, and both some of the problems companies have run into, and then some of the companies that have responded to your engagement.
We engage companies through both the shareholder resolution and the index. And I think today, we're finding that companies are really recognizing that political spending is a risk. I mean, that was the crucial breakthrough that we made, and it occurred, I would say, about 2010 or so, when we were involved in writing the Conference Board's Handbook on Corporate Political Activity. We had done a great deal of writing on that beforehand and working with companies on that. But the fact is, once the Conference Board put its imprimatur on the risk that companies face from their political spending with corporate funds and the need for companies to manage and oversee that risk, that really accelerated the process. We're now finding that that companies want to become trendsetters in the CPA-Zicklin Index. This is, again, the annual benchmarking. We're now wrapping up the 2020 index, and we find that companies come to us close to the end saying, look, what do we need to do to be able to reach that trendsetter status? Because when they use that then in their corporate social responsibility report, in their annual reports, they want to show that they have good, transparent, open political spending policies and practices. Now, you asked, what are the areas, the types of transparency on spending? You have PAC spending, which is publicly disclosed. That's, disclosure is required under a federal election law. So you can find out, what the company, who's giving to the company PAC, where the company PAC is giving. There are the 527 committees. These are political committees. Some of them can be the super PACs. They are required to disclose either to the Federal Election Commission or some of them are disclosed to the Internal Revenue Service. You have the Governors Associations, the state legislative campaign committees, and the Attorneys General Associations that report to the IRS. Now, in the case of the groups that report to the IRS, it's the recipient that discloses, not the donor. That's important. So I would say that's an area that's sort of gray. It has partial disclosure. But then you have the trade associations and the 501c4s, and these are groups that raise millions of dollars, and that money is hidden. No disclosure is required. In fact, the 501c4 is used as a way to launder money, because you'll find that companies and others will give to 501c4s, and then the C4 in turn will contribute to a super PAC. There'll be disclosure of the contribution from the C4, but you don't know who the underlying donor is. Now, in the case of the 527s, you're looking at hundreds of millions of dollars that have been contributed to the 527s by companies. We did original research, groundbreaking research on this, and we were very interested in, how much money was raised by the partisan state-focused 527s over the past decade. We found it came to about $1.5 billion. Now, close to half of that, 48% of that, came from public companies and their trade associations. That's important because it shows their dominance as funders. Now, what were the results of that? Over the past decade, you could see the change in control of legislatures. When you had the change in control of legislatures, you were getting gerrymandering. And there was an element of racial gerrymandering that was involved there. Then when you had elections of governors, you would have then the enactment of legislation. You had, the attack on LGBTQ rights. You had the attack on women's reproductive rights. All of these, again, flowed from, contributions that went to state legislative campaign committees and governors associations. You also had the attack in that's going to be coming up before the Supreme Court the week after the election on the Affordable Care Act. That was a result of contributions that were made to an Attorney General Association. So, there are significant consequences that pose very serious reputational and business risks to companies today because of the outcomes that companies are associated with.
Yeah, and just to highlight a couple of things. One, for me, one of the biggest surprises, just what I did relative to what I knew 2 years ago was the size, just the sheer magnitude of public companies' participation in the process, and particularly its role in the states. That was just it's a big number. It's not a small number in terms of the share, which I thought was really interesting and important. I think the other thing that I think that I've seen, and you and I have discussed, is companies, a company may give their money to, as you said, some of these 527s, and as it passes through the system, end up supporting a policy that's very directly, ultimately support a policymaker who supports a policy that's just directly and in a very direct way at odds with what that company portrays as their own values. And I thought it was really interesting, some of the examples you kind of talked me through, just of how when that disconnect is sort of put in front of them, sometimes they're very aware of it and sometimes they weren't. And the transparency is certainly a good lever to help companies make decisions to take some of that risk off the table.
You're absolutely right. In many cases, company review of a contribution does not go beyond just the immediate contribution, asking, does it create a pro-business climate? They're really not taking a look at what the overall impact is on the political environment, and also what the overall impact is in terms of the type of legislation or policy consequences that can flow from that contribution. And that poses a real threat to companies today, because the public and consumers and employees are looking very closely at what a company stands for. That company mission statement, that company value statement now is really used by these people, these groups, individuals, to really get a sense of the personality of a company. And it can really have I think, very harmful consequences when consumer, employee, the public sees this type of conflict. I mean, you're seeing this now in racial justice. You're seeing it on Black Lives Matter, where people are holding up that screen, the company statements on Black Lives Matter, and then they take a look at the company's contributions, for instance, to the Republican State Leadership Committee. And what does that mean for gerrymandering and racial gerrymandering? Or a company stating, that it supports addressing climate change, it's environmentally conscious, but yet it gives to the Republican Attorneys General Association that supports attorneys general who are filing suit against the Environmental Protection Agency's Clean Power Plan or other initiatives. I mean, I mention these groups just because we follow the money. We've been very, very careful to avoid any partisan tilt in this. But as we've stated at the beginning of the Conflicted Consequences report, the collision course, these reports follow the money. And you find that the lion's share of the money is going to these groups.
Thanks, Bruce. I guess just to wrap up, the other thing I think would be really interesting, myself as an investor and other investors, the Zicklin Index, the CPA Zicklin Index. I wonder if you could just speak briefly to kind of the role that's played and the role some investors are using for that as they think about the kind of investments they want to make in companies.
CPA Zicklin Index now has a major impact. It's used by asset managers, as they're deciding on their ESG portfolios, as they're making decisions on voting on the CPA political disclosure resolution. It has a major impact on company political behavior. We're finding that companies are using the 24 indicators in the index as the template for the policies that they should be adopting. We're finding now that there's been a real boom in the Trump years in company adoption of more robust oversight of their political spending. Overall, the 2020 index is going to show that political disclosure and accountability policies are holding their own. The number of trendsetters is holding steady, may increase slightly. But when you dig into the numbers, the number of core companies, the 378 that we've been tracking since 2015, that have been on the index, there we see significant increases in companies adopting committee review of the spending, committee review of trade association payments and payments to C4s, payments to 527s. So, they're getting more deeply into where the spending is going, and the big area now that needs to be filled in is behavior. looking at these broader consequences, adopting the type of policies to address that. We're coming out shortly with our updated model code of conduct for corporate political spending that's going to complement the index, and that will really provide a framework for companies on how to address this whole behavioral issue in looking at their political spending in, let's say, a three-dimensional context.
Yeah, I certainly to folks interested in doing investing in the ESG space, I think if you think about our U.S. economy and the U.S. political process and how we as investors can play important roles, I'd encourage others to certainly take a look at the CPA's Income Index as another important dimension on which companies, can contribute positively to, to a broader society. But thank you, Bruce. It's great as always speaking with you, and I'm sure we'll touch base soon.
Kevin, it's a pleasure, and I really appreciate Leadership Now's support and deep commitment to addressing this.